Think about a criminal so elusive he avoided being caught for over 40 years. From 1974 to 1986, the state of California was under the terrifying shadow of the Golden State Killer, a criminal mastermind whose horrifying acts included more than 50 sexual assaults, 13 murders, and over 100 burglaries. His chilling ability to infiltrate homes unnoticed and behind a trail of fear and havoc was nothing short of extraordinary. His brutal crimes were numerous, yet despite this, his identity remained a mystery. He was an enigma, a phantom that instilled fear and left chaos in wake. His reign of terror went on for years, with his identity hidden from the world until it was 2018. This terrifying figure, one that kept the state of California in a perpetual state of fear and unrest for over a decade, was none other than the Golden State Killer. But who exactly was the man behind these heinous crimes? Meet Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., better known as the Golden State Killer. On the surface, he was a man just like any other, living a seemingly ordinary life. His past was marked by a stint in the military, serving his country in Vietnam. Upon his return, he took up a role of service once again, this time as a police officer. A man in uniform sworn to protect and serve, his public persona was one of respectability and trust. DeAngelo was known to be a diligent officer, enforcing the law with a stern hand during his time on the force. He was a man who walked among us, hiding in plain sight. He was the neighbor you'd wave to, the officer who'd help you out, the veteran who'd served his country. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, there lurked a dark secret. Unbeknownst to those around him, DeAngelo led a double life. While he walked the beat by day, he transformed into a monster by night. He used his knowledge of law enforcement and military tactics not to protect, but to terrorize. His victims were many, his crimes unspeakable. His life was a chilling paradox, a police officer who was a serial offender, a military veteran who turned against his own citizens, a neighbor who was a nightmare. His ability to compartmentalize his life was terrified. He was a master at wearing the mask of normalcy while harboring a darkness that was anything but normal.
27 of those cases, and hearing repeatedly over and over what this man did to these women and what they went through. There wasn't a night went by that I didn't close my eyes and think about what those victims went through.
This was the man behind the mask, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., the Golden State Killer. A man who used his knowledge, skills, and public persona as a shield to carry out his horrifying crimes. A man who, for over a decade, evaded the very law he was supposed to uphold. A man of two faces, DeAngelo was a master of deception. Now let's take a closer look at the horrifying actions of the Golden State Killer. This was no ordinary lawbreaker. His deeds were the result of careful scheming and were carried out with a precision that sent chills down the spine. He was a hunter in the darkness, hiding behind a trademark ski mask and stalking communities under the veil of nightfall. Before launching his assault, he would meticulously study his victims, understanding their daily patterns and weak spots. This was not a man who believed uncertainty. Once he had selected his victims, he would strike, often using shoelaces he had brought himself to bind them. This particular method turned into a signature, an emblem of his reign of terror.
I remember the heat of his breath on my neck. I remember his voice. I remember the weight of his body and his knife. I remember it all too much. It's not something you forget, and it's not something that doesn't change the core of you.
His victims were diverse, from young ladies to middle-aged women. From the peaceful suburbs of Sacramento to the seaside of Southern California, no one was immune from his grasp. His atrocities covered an expansive geographical area, which only emphasized his audacity and his intention to sow seeds of terror in the minds of the entire Golden State. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of his crimes was the sheer number. Over 10 years, he was accountable for over 50 sexual assaults and 12 homicides. Each offense was a chilling showcase of his ruthless cruelty and utter contempt for human life and respect.
Joseph DeAngelo isn't just the Visalia ransacker or the East Area rapist or the Golden State Killer. Having sat here today and listened and sat that night of his interview, he is the real-life version of Hannibal Lecter. He is a cruel, intelligent, sadistic serial killer. He is pure sociopath. He is a master manipulator.
Terror was not a product of impulsive disorder, but a terrifying proof of human wickedness. These not haphazard acts of violence, but a well-planned reigning terror. So, what made D'Angelo commit these horrifying crimes? One may question. The key to understanding this lies in a few critical points about D'Angelo's character and past. Known as the Golden State Killer, D'Angelo differed from the average man. He lacked what most people possess: empathy. Instead, he was obsessed with violence, relishing in the fear he could instill in others. His actions weren't just a result of this obsession, they were fueled by it. But what could have possibly triggered D'Angelo to carry out such monstrous deeds? There are a few theories. Some believe it may have been a need for revenge, a distorted way of settling scores. Others propose that he derived a perverse joy from knowing his victims in continuous dread of his reappearance. His experience in the Vietnam War might have also played a role, amplifying his already troubled mentality. However, one must bear in mind that these are merely speculations. The workings of the human mind are intricate and often veiled in secrecy. In conclusion, D'Angelo's actions are a stark reminder of the dark side of human nature. The Golden State Killer's crimes terrorized California in the late 70s and early 80s. His violence wasn't only felt by his victims, it spread fear throughout the state. People were terrified as the sun set, knowing he could strike anywhere from Sacramento to Santa Barbara. The media only increased this fear, with headlines describing his horrifying acts. The Golden State Killer's actions affected more than his victims. Entire communities were traumatized psychologically and physically, causing lasting damage. His reign of terror touched everyone, leaving a lasting impression, fear, and insecurity. Even after he stopped, the fear he created remained, making it difficult for society to restore their sense of safety. The Golden State Killer's legacy is a dark one that continues to haunt us today. After many years of hiding, the Golden State Killer's time of causing fear finally stopped. The very scary story of the Golden State Killer changed for good in 2018. That's when Joseph James D'Angelo Jr., the man behind the crimes, was caught. They found him thanks to DNA evidence, a very useful tool in solving crimes today. This DNA evidence pointed the detectives to D'Angelo's house. Catching ended a 40-year search, a non-stop effort to get justice for his victims.
The Golden State Killer, who left his DNA in multiple cases back in the 1970s and 1980s, is Joseph D'Angelo.
D'Angelo was told he will stay in jail forever without a chance to get parole, emphasizing the severity of the Golden State Killer's crimes.
I cried because finally I had a face. Now I'm not wondering as I'm walking down the street that I could be talking to that man. I don't care that he's old. I don't care that he's feeble. I do care that he sits and lives with it until the day he dies.
This was a proper punishment for a man who hurt so many people. The punishment showed that no matter how much time passes, justice will always happen. Justice may have taken long, but it did happen.